Well, lessons from the good book could be among the lessons millions of kids in Texas learn next school year. Today, the state school board voting to greenlight what they call Bluebonnet Learning curriculum. It infuses the Bible into classes for kids in kindergarten through the fifth grade. This program has been months in the making. It's optional. Supporters say that it will help teach subjects like reading and language arts while introducing kids to religious history. But critics argue it highlights Christianity more than any other religion, and some of the lessons possibly undermine the separation of church and state. The 15-member board voted 8-7 to approve it, with 3 Republicans joining Democrats in voting against it. The tie-breaking vote was cast by new member Leslie Racine. Texas Governor Greg Abbott appointed her to temporarily fill a vacancy after the election. Another member who was elected to that seat will take her place at the end of the year. Joining me now, a member of the State Board of Education who voted against it, Democrat James Talarico. Thank you so much for joining us. You're studying to be a Christian pastor. Why do you believe this curriculum, though, is preaching, not teaching?
Well, before I was a legislator, I was a Texas public school teacher. And as you mentioned, I'm a current seminary student studying to become a Presbyterian minister. And so I know personally that there is a difference between preaching and teaching. Under federal law, schools can teach the Bible as an academic text, but not in a devotional way. In other words, public schools are not Sunday schools. Or as Greg Abbott is fond of saying, schools are for education, not indoctrination. And you know, Laura, I'm not the only one who thinks that this curriculum is unconstitutional. The Texas Republicans who crafted this curriculum also think it's unconstitutional because in the bill that created this curriculum, they explicitly grant immunity for Texas educators who violate the Establishment Clause of the United States Constitution, otherwise known as the separation of church and state. So this curriculum is unconstitutional, it's un-American, and I also believe it's deeply un-Christian.
You know, one of the lesson plans, I should say, for kindergartners emphasizes teaching the book of Genesis from the Bible and helping kids understand the phrase, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. Tell me about a lesson specifically like this. Is that appropriate for a elementary school student in light of what you've described as that separation, of course, of church and state?
You know, Christian nationalists are so focused on pushing Christianity in school that they've forgotten the Christianity we learned in church. Jesus taught us to love our neighbors as ourselves. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, Jesus specifically defines neighbor as someone different from us, religiously, racially, culturally. And this new Texas curriculum elevates Christianity over the other major world religions. I consider the Hindu student, the Jewish student, the Muslim student, the Buddhist student, the atheist student who sits in a classroom in a Texas public school to be my neighbor. And as a Christian, I am called to love them as myself. And forcing my religion down their throats is not love. I think if Jesus read this new curriculum, he would weep for those students. And then I think he would overturn our desks in the Texas legislature.
But there are those who will say, this is optional, this is not mandated. Is that disingenuous? Does that change the calculus as you describe?
I think it's misleading. You've got to know the context here in Texas. We rank 43rd in the nation in per student education funding. Texas teachers are making less than they did 10 years ago when you adjust for inflation. So Greg Abbott has created a school funding emergency in this state. And there are heavy financial incentives tied to this new optional curriculum. So it's not optional when you're starving schools of desperately needed funding and then dangling financial incentives to use an unconstitutional curriculum.
Do you anticipate, has already been talked about, there being legal challenges? And by the way, given that the person who was a tie-breaking vote has a short tenure until the person actually supposed to be in that seat ultimately will be there, will this hold through the duration of the next academic school year?
We'll see, but I think we should also mention that there was bipartisan opposition to this new curriculum on the State Board of Education. It wasn't just Democrats who voted against it. It was also conservative Republicans who are Christians themselves. I think conservatives should be really concerned about the state usurping the role of the church. The separation of church and state is not only for the benefit of our democracy, it's also for the benefit of the church. And I, for one, don't feel comfortable with government employees teaching our faith. We have places where we can do that, and they're called churches.
State Representative James Talarico, we've all been fascinated by what's happened, and we'll continue to follow this story. Thank you.
Thank you.
Up next, Matt Gaetz's new job, charging more than $500 for a personal video on Cameo.
What does it mean to be out front?